Werewolf-like creatures? Check. Awesome campaign? Check. Yeah. It's pretty hard to resist this one. So when Mammoth Factory got in touch with me and asked if I wanted to do some kind of collaboration work and have one of their sets sent over to me to print off, yeah, I just couldn't resist it. So in this video, I'm going to be printing off one of the D&D campaigns by Mammoth Factory, printing off their models, painting them up, and just giving you my first impressions about what this looks like and whether or not it's worthwhile trying out one of their packs. So as you've probably gathered right from the beginning of that video, Mammoth Factory did get in contact with me and sent this over to me free of charge to print off and just give my honest opinion on. They didn't have any sort of like terms and conditions or anything, they just sent it over and said have a blast. So that's what I have done. Now, Curse of the Skinwalkers is the pack that I chose to go for because it looked absolutely awesome. And basically, if you've watched Dog Soldiers, if that's a film that you've seen, or The Thing, it gives you those sort of vibes. Basically, you are a band of adventurers who end up in a tavern surrounded by these werewolf-like creatures, which look absolutely awesome, by the way. Now, before I get on to printing these off and painting them and all of that, I just want to talk a little bit about what you actually get as part of the Mammoth Factory pack. So you can either subscribe to their Patreon or you can buy their previous packs online, and you get all of your STLs for your models, which is kind of a given, and they are really high quality. They're very, very detailed, well supported, and all of that jazz. But more importantly, you get a full campaign. So it can be a one-shot, it can be part of your campaign. You can just go off to it, and it tells you what you need, gives you all of the story, the backstory, all of the lore for all of your different characters. But one of the great things about it, it comes with all the different maps that you're going to need. And even if you're not a 3D printer, you get all the tokens. So you can just print those off on a standard printer and still have a blast with this campaign. So it's worthwhile trying out, even if you don't have a resin 3D printer. Now, I decided that I was going to take some of their maps and build some terrain. I'll be doing this in more detail in a follow-up video just because I've done this using lots of polystyrene, lots of sort of like foam bricks, which has taken a long time, but I'll be walking through how I built it and all the bits I'm 3D printing for that as well to go with it, so make sure you subscribe for it. This video is focused on these absolutely awesome minis. So let's kick off with the werewolf-like creatures, and the one thing that I really like about these is when I first saw them, I just thought, standard werewolves, which we are used to, but actually they've taken a bit of a different spin on it and they are skinwalkers instead. So when I printed them off, I was originally going to go for like a really dark sort of, I guess, source lighting type effect on these. So everything else will be black apart from right at the front. But there's loads of these really cool details on these models. So they've got all these like awful, pussy kind of lumps all over them, all these like growths, and they just look like mangy dogs. And I didn't want to miss out on that detail. If I'd have just gone with that sort of like source lighting and had them lit up from the front, I'd not been able to paint as much fun details on these. So I decided I was just going to go for just a standard paint job with them. Now, like I said, they're not just your standard werewolves. They're basically, they look like they're some kind of transformed human fleshy thing that's really mangy. They look really menacing because of the fact that they are so mangy and just horrid that you definitely wouldn't want to get in contact with. So to kick it all off, I went off with a Zenithal Prime, so I hit them all with a black on my airbrush and then went over the top with a white ink just to really bring out some of those details. When I did this, I was actually really tempted just to leave them at that because they looked so cool in that sort of detail. They really did look like that sort of black and white, they're all fighting in the dark and all of that. And I was very tempted just to leave it there. But because, like I said, there's so many cool details on this, I just had to paint them up. So with this, it's actually a really easy and simple paint job. So to kick it off, I went with a Crusader skin. Like I said, they're very fleshy and they've only got like patches of fur on them instead. I was going to go for like a black or a grey, more like a standard werewolf type thing, but because they are so skinny and fleshy and I wanted to really kind of highlight some of those like lumps and growths on them, I went with just a normal Crusader skin on them. Turned out really well, to be fair, on that, and it started to look pretty good straight away. Afterwards, whilst that was still drying, so pretty much used speed paints exclusively throughout this. So whilst it was still drying, I hit them with a malignant green. So this was on all of like the spots and the growths and those lesions. And the great thing about doing it whilst it's still drying is you can really get in there and blend it in with the skin. So there's that really nice transition between those like growths. I don't know why I'm pointing at my own shoulder. I don't have these growths all over me, at least I hope not. But yeah, you get that really nice transition between that and the flesh, and it starts to look really good. Again, whilst it's still drying, if you're fast enough, I then hit it with a runic grey for all of the fur patches. And again, the great thing about this is it just allows you to get that transition in between it all and just kind of really blend it all very nicely. Once that was done, I literally just went back in with a yellow. So I started off with the Zillock yellow, went back in for all the teeth and the claws, and it was pretty much done at this stage. However, it's worthwhile going back in and just kind of darkening them down in some areas and then going back in with some highlights. Now I just did my usual. I broke out my oil wash and I kind of poured it all over these things. It was a black oil wash. It was very diluted in this case. Obviously there's a lot of spirits hitting this, and I haven't found any issues using an oil wash on Army Paint or Speed Paint. So that's one thing to know. I don't have any issues. I don't varnish beforehand. Maybe it's something I should try, but I've just never had any issues so far. Once I'd hit them with that oil wash, I left them for about half an hour, went back in with a Q-tip and just took off some of that dark spots just all over it where I wanted to kind of have a bit more of the highlights coming through. On things like the spots, for example, I just took off some of that darkness and it really kind of helped to highlight the areas I wanted to draw attention to. These three models were really easy to paint. They literally took very few colors, and once you hit them with a wash afterwards, you kind of cover up any of those details you might have missed. So it's a very easy and simple to do paint job, and honestly, I think it looks really good. I'm really happy with how these turned out. Moving across onto my adventures, and I wasn't really sure, I didn't have too much of a plan. This guy looks so much like Kurt Russell from The Thing that I just kind of went in there and had an absolute blast with him. So obviously for all the fleshy parts I used Crusader skin, and then I went back in with a camo cloak for the pants, and I think they turned out really nicely. And then for all the browns I just used a hardened leather all over it. Once that is done, normally I would go back in with a dry brush, but actually I decided I would try and do some actual highlighting for a change. I really enjoyed it. It just kind of brought things up quite nicely. And then for the hair, I originally hit it with like the white speed paint, but it just didn't really do anything. So I went back in with a pallid bone just to kind of give him this kind of a bit of a darker white, maybe a muddy white and stuff like that. I think he turned out really nicely. With the lady in the crazy high heels, she's definitely taking a leaf out of the Jurassic World playbook right there. I went in with, I wanted it to be quite bright, and I based a lot of this on like Triss Merigold from The Witcher. So I went for the Fire Giant orange for her hair, and I think that turned out very nicely. And I wanted her to have a really kind of striking blue cloak. So I went with the Magic Blue, and actually turned out very nicely. Everything else in terms of like her boots, like a corset underneath, that was all done with a hardened leather, and I used some metallics on the blade. Once that was done, I just went back in there again with my black ink, my black oil wash, washed it all over, and then went back in and kind of took some off the top areas where I didn't want it to be quite as dark, and pretty much called it done from that point. The next two, which are like the bosses from this. The first one is this lady who looks absolutely awesome. She's this like vine-like creature that's coming out of the earth, and she's got all these kind of tendrils and roots and everything coming off of her. And I wasn't too sure how to go with this at first. I was going to use that same Crusader skin, but I decided she really needed to be like this leafy type creature that's been converted by the forest, and I wanted to kind of throw in some reds and everything as well. So first up, I hit her with that same malignant green. I figured all of their lesions and growths and everything else needed to be coming from this, and she needed to match it and blend in with them. I then went back in with the Absolution green on sort of like the vines that are tangling around her on her back, and sort of these roots that are coming up from below as well. Once I was done, she looked really good, and I was going to call it there, but I decided I wanted to go back in and do something a little bit different. So I decided to break out one of my magenta oils. I turned it into a magenta oil wash and then threw it all over, and I was really impressed with how it came out. There wasn't really much need to go back in and wipe any of it off. It kind of got in all those crevices and around all the vines and all the leafy areas and everything, and it makes it look like she's maybe got this kind of like flesh underneath that was once upon a time human, and it's really sore, and it blends in all of that kind of malignant green and Absolution green. I really like the way it turned out, and it contrasts so nicely with all the greens on there. Where it spills over and kind of runs down all of those roots, it just adds in again. It makes it look like this is some kind of fleshy tree that's growing up from the ground to consume people and infect them. So really happy with how that turned out, and incredibly easy to pull that one off. And finally, onto the big beastie, and he was actually, surprisingly, the easiest one to paint out of all of them. Literally just got a very big brush, some Crusader skin, I washed it all over. I was tempted to use the airbrush for this, but I figured considering I'm doing a painting video, not everybody has an airbrush, it just made sense to use a paintbrush. Pop that all over, and again, use pretty much the same recipe that I did with these wolves here. So then I went back in with my malignant green for all of like the putty and spotty bits, my runic grey for all of the fur, and then for the bases, for all of them is a mix of like dark wood and also Absolution green just for the grassy areas. Once that was done, he was looking pretty cool, but he needed some kind of wash, and I was going to go for black, but considering how good the magenta turned out on the Leafy Lady, I wanted to do the same again for this. So I got my magenta oil wash, threw it all over him, and then I was going to go back in and wipe some of it off to give that fleshy appearance, but the way he turned out, I had to leave him like this. He looks really awesome. He looks like he's got this really like raw skin all over that is almost like burned, and it must be really tender, and he must be absolutely in agony as he's going around. He's got all these sort of like pus spots all over him. He's just transforming. He's got these sort of like talons bursting out of his skin, and he's got this really red inflamed skin all over it. It's just going to make him just an absolutely crazy beast. So I left that magenta pretty much all over, and I'm really happy with the way it tinted it, and it turned out so a nice easy one for you to do. So painting up all of those models was actually really easy. You only needed a few different colors as you're mixing and matching between them, and it didn't take me that long at all to get the whole set printed off and painted as well. These models, the details on them, they really lend themselves to painting. And the great thing is they don't really have any hard to reach spots or anything like that. They're all very easy to paint. I was really impressed with them, and the details were fantastic. Printing them off as well was really easy. They all come pre-supported. You can use them non-supported as well, and they have their own bases. So literally getting them all printed off, I didn't have any failures or anything like that. Pulling them off the supports was very easy too, so that was really handy. So yeah, I was really impressed with these models. I had an absolute blast painting them. Easy to paint, easy to print, so definitely recommended from that perspective. All of the stuff that you get with Mammoth Factory is really impressive, and a lot of detail, time and effort clearly goes into creating these campaigns. I definitely recommend it. If you're the type of player who is looking to maybe add something different to a D&D campaign that you're running, maybe have a one-shot mission, it's worthwhile checking out. And like I mentioned at the start, even if you don't necessarily have a 3D printer, you still get all the tokens and everything else that you can print off on a standard printer if you want to. Really detailed campaigns, a lot of fun in terms of the story, and I cannot wait to start playing this. Also, like I said, because it comes with all of the maps, so all the different levels, all the different maps, you can then obviously print those off if you want to, or you can get creative like this and yeah, try and build something. So that's going to be an interesting video. So make sure you subscribe and see how I've managed to pull this off. I mean, it's relatively easy at this stage. The next stage is probably going to throw me, getting everything printed and having to paint all the extra bits as well that are going to go with it. So yeah, might be pulling the rest of my hair out with that one. So I hope you've enjoyed that video. If you have, hit the like and subscribe button and come along for some more 3D printing content in the future. And thanks so much to Mammoth Factory for getting in contact. Really impressed with the level of detail on these sculpts, how easy they've been to print, and just the detail and the love that's clearly gone into the campaigns that those guys over there have been creating. They're well and truly worthwhile checking out. Let me know what else you'd like to see in the future, especially if it's in terms of this sort of thing with D&D campaigns. In my head, I've got an idea of printing off a really small scale one, so taking all these types of miniatures, maybe dropping them down to like 15mm scale instead, and halving the size that you'd need for your terrain, and all the models, maybe like a little pocketable D&D campaign that you can carry around with you. Let me know if that's something you'd be interested in, but in the meantime, take care, and I'll see you soon. Bye!